Good evening and welcome to Three Wide. I'm Rick. I'm joined tonight by Anthony and Peter. And don't know what it's like where you are, but we're a little bit waterlogged here in southern New England. I know that in the metro New York area, it's pretty much the same. I hope it's bright and sunny where you are. And woohoo, summer starts tomorrow. And that brings a lot of happiness to a lot of folks. Well, we are here tonight to talk about the week gone by and the week coming up in NASCAR world. We have four tremendous topics this evening. The first is to talk about Ross Chastain and what happened in the Gander Outdoor Truck Series last weekend. To talk about Johnny Sauter and what happened with him last weekend in the Truck Series. A little look forward at Sonoma and some thoughts from our panel as to who to look for at Sonoma as we go into our first road course race of the season. And then finally, to wrap up the show tonight, the Three Wide team is going to say goodbye to old DW. And we'll share some thoughts on Darrell Waltrip, his contributions to the sport, and what he has meant to NASCAR Nation, not only throughout his racing career, but since 2001 as a broadcaster on the Fox network. So it's an ambitious show tonight. We're going to kick things off with last weekend's race in the Gander Outdoor Truck Series. And as we all know by now, the winner, as it turns out, wasn't the winner. Ross Chastain failed inspection in post-race. And we had some interesting discussions offline about this. Anthony, Peter, what are your thoughts on what happened to Chastain? And admittedly, NASCAR had said at the beginning of the season that if you had a failed post-race inspection and you won, that win was going to be taken away. How do we feel about that now? And by the way, Peter, I love the shirt in the background there. Sort of a melancholy show tonight. You know, we've got to kind of take some of these issues seriously, but a lot of emotion, I think, associated with old DW riding off into the sunset. But first up, Ross Chastain, what do you think? What do you think what happened last week? Was the penalty warranted? Obviously a lot happens during a race. The configuration of a vehicle can change slightly. Anthony has the little one in hand, so we've got the newest member of NASCAR Nation and Chase Elliott Nation here. Hello, Anastasia. Welcome to Three Wide. Peter, what do you think about what happened to Ross Chastain last weekend?
Oh, man. I mean, I'm gutted for Ross. I mean, how could you not root for the guy? He feels like there's a dark cloud that's been over his head. He had such a good opportunity with Chip Ganassi Racing, and then to hear everything fall out with DC Solar, lose the sponsorship, and then ultimately have him kind of moonlight in every series. He's been well traveled this year, to say the least. So I think he made the right choice. We really didn't get a chance to really talk about the opportunity that he has elected to run the Truck Series points instead of the Xfinity Series. And, with the short season that the trucks have, that was quite the gamble. Seemed like it paid off. Came to Iowa, ran really well. It was an exciting race, start to finish. I know a lot of people are rooting for Ross and the Nice Motorsports team. They're not one of the premier teams in the Camping World Truck Series or Gander Outdoors Truck Series now. So it was really interesting to see. However, from my understanding, the truck after the race was off by quite a large margin. So knowing that the truck was illegal at that point, I think the penalty was warranted. I know the team Nice Motorsports did try to appeal. However, NASCAR ruled, I believe, yesterday that the penalties will be upheld. So gutted for Ross and that Nice Motorsports team. But it's awesome to see NASCAR kind of roll out this new procedure and policy. We've gotten to this point about halfway into the season where we haven't had anybody fail post-race. Obviously the term's been kind of killed, but no more encumberments. So it really seems like NASCAR's got the teams playing by the rules. So this is the first instance where a team was found, beyond that rule book. Hate it for Ross again. Again, fan favorite guy. He's trying so hard to make it in NASCAR, and I can only hope that in the remaining 6 races in the Truck Series, him and Nice Motorsports to get another opportunity to try to punch their ticket into the playoffs, because they certainly deserve it. What do you guys think? Do you guys think that this post-race inspection process at the track now, instead of bringing the victory car to R&D with a couple others, do you think it's a good process and procedure? Do you think it's worked so far halfway into the year?
I like it. I think it's worked so far halfway into the year because we've gone this far into the year before we've seen them having to use the new rule set for disqualifying drivers. I think it's kind of a blessing in disguise that it happened to a camp or Gander Outdoor Truck Series event before a Monster Energy event was found to be with a false winner. You gotta hate it for Ross, but if you followed NASCAR's lower levels in the last 2 or 3 years, this is a kid who's bounced around to different companies, different teams. He's driven the wheels off of anything that he's been put in. He's already got a win in the Gander Outdoor Truck Series this year before he declared himself points eligible on June 4th for the Gander Truck Series. He's still pretty close to jumping into the top 20 in points that would keep him eligible for the playoffs if he does earn himself a win or bring himself into the top, I believe, 12 in points for the Truck Series. You got to remember, he's only just declared himself points eligible as of the June 4th race weekend. So I think this is his second or third, and he's already closing the door on top 20 within fairly good shot of earning himself in on points, unless there's a clause saying that he has to win a race. I think the ride height rule is a little silly. The owner of Nice Motorsports did point out that it's kind of an old rule if you think about it. The Cup Series doesn't even have the rule that disqualified Ross Chastain anymore for being too low. There's no ride height rule for a Monster Energy Cup car. I think in the same thing for the Xfinity Series. So I think it's a little bit of a silly technical rule that they got caught on, but a rule is a rule. There's no gray area on this. It's all black and white. We knew that NASCAR was going to be very strict, especially the first time. If you're going to get caught with your hand between your pants on a rule infraction, you don't want there to be a gray area the first time that you have to enforce the new rules. So I think that NASCAR made the right call. They had to make the tough call, but it's something I think that Nice Motorsports and Ross Chastain can definitely recover from.
It's interesting. My perspective on this whole thing is that you are infinitely better having this kind of inspection at the track. I absolutely love that. I think there isn't a perfect scenario. I think when the crowd is there at the track, they deserve to know who won the race. This is going to be as close as you're going to get to it. I think NASCAR is in the right direction, again, with holding the inspection at the track. I think there are still enough people that are around, that are listening on the radio, that are watching, post-race coverage at home or listening to it, and they're able to know who the real winner was. I think the sport has done some good work there by having it at the track rather than back at the R&D center. I don't think we want to find out 3 or 4 days later that, who we thought won last Saturday night or Friday night did not indeed win. So I think they're on the right track there. I do agree with you guys that a rule is a rule. Everybody knew this going in. But I also believe that NASCAR, and I think they will do this, NASCAR is probably going to get away from the ride height ruling in the Truck Series to bring some consistency to the sport at each level. I think that's coming. Will it come this year? I don't know.
Yeah, the best argument that I saw was ride height while the truck is standing still is not indicative of how high the truck is on the track. You could have the truck sucked down, but have it 6 inches high in the garage.
And we've talked about this in the past. I am very much against, unless it is a safety issue, I'm very much against changing rules midway through the season. I just think it just has the sport lose a level of credibility when you start doing that. So I do think they'll do it. I just don't know that it'll be this year.
I tend to agree with that. You got to stick with the rules, and we've made that argument with the Monster Energy series, especially with the changes they're going through with the package. If you're going to make any big changes, you gotta stick it out this year. Let this year be the example and the reason as to why you change it next year. I think that's like you said, it's the best strategy moving forward, so that there is no gray area. And if you change the ride height rule, then you have the argument of, well, you're changing the ride height rule to make it legal, but Ross got caught on it. At least make it the rule for the year. Change it next year.
Right, exactly. And so I think you'll be looking for that probably next season. In the same race, and I got to tell you, if you are a NASCAR fan, I think you're going to find that all of the action is not really at the Monster Energy Cup level. There is a tremendous amount of action in this sport at the Truck Series and in Xfinity. And I'll tell you, the Truck Series is starting to remind me of, which is great, I think, for the sport, of the good old-fashioned Friday nights at the dimly lit local track that we've all been to. That's how we all grew up. And this particular race really showed us some of that old school fire and brimstone. Not sure it's a great thing, but we're going to talk about it, and that obviously involves the Johnny Sauter, Austin Hill incident. And we had some interesting discussions off air about this. Guys, it's a 3,000-pound weapon. Should we be using it that way? What are your thoughts?
Absolutely not. I think the whole incident going in, if you look at the history between the two drivers, there was 2 weekends in a row where Austin Hill, Johnny Sauter made contact. That was Johnny's biggest, I guess he used as a defense on his radio after the retaliation that we saw at Iowa. Look, they were racing incidents 2 weeks ago. Looked like it was a racing incident on Sunday. Johnny getting into Austin Hill, it kind of looked like he disguised the tap very well going into turn one. Austin Hill said, all right, fine, you're going to tap me, I'm going to tap you. And it just looked like Johnny just couldn't control the truck, and he spun and tapped the wall. All is fair in that, I think. The real issue came with when the yellow came out. Johnny, and we've seen reflections of this in the past with other drivers that I'll get into. But the real issue is Johnny Sauter basically headhunting for Austin Hill's truck. I don't think if he only hits him in the door, puts him in the wall, that he gets suspended. I think you see a really heavy fine come out of that. My issue was, and as I was watching it live, was he puts him in the wall, and I don't know if Johnny let off the gas to slow down on purpose, but when Austin turns, his driver's side door is facing Johnny's front bumper, and you can see that Johnny turns the wheel and gasses into the door. It's not just an incidental contact at that point. You can see there was deliberate aim towards the door, towards the numbers on the side of that truck. I think that's where the penalty was decided. As soon as I saw that, and as soon as the news came out that incident was going to be reviewed, my immediate thought was he deserves at least a one race suspension. I didn't think he was going to get 2 or 3. I thought 1 was more than fair. I thought 1 sent the message across. And it kind of still, like we're going to talk about, I don't want to hear your guys' opinions, is it still kind of encompasses and allows and permits the boys have at it persona of the sport. But it kind of lets them know, like, hey, if you go a little too far, we're still gonna ring you in the important thing to look at, and we touched on this last week, was incidents in the past, like we saw with Kyle Busch, with Ron Hornaday at Texas, was pretty similar. You saw the two drivers get together, the yellow came out, Kyle Busch just drove Ron Hornaday right into the wall, ruined his race. They immediately parked him, and I believe he was suspended for the Cup race that weekend also. And then on top of that, he was given a fine, and he was given probation to, I think, halfway through the next season. The big selling point on this, and what I think will stand the argument of they're still letting boys have at it, it's a one race suspension. I think there's a small fine, but from what I've read anywhere, there's no probation for Johnny Sauter. That's going to be the next move if this saga continues. They still have that bullet loaded in the chamber.
Peter?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting that you brought up Kyle Busch and Ron Hornaday, because that's right where my mind went when I saw it. I was thinking that, obviously it's not a carbon copy of that same wreck, but similar circumstances. Hard racing leads to a wreck under caution. The only difference with the Hornaday one was NASCAR actually didn't suspend Kyle Busch. It was, in fact, Joe Gibbs and M&M Mars that instituted the suspension. M&M threatened JGR that they would pull sponsorship for the next Cup race, and Joe was kind of put into a position where he was like, well, I got to kind of make a move here. So, he must have been the best guy to keep Kyle Busch in check, because he was able to, I guess kind of dampen that situation, keep NASCAR at bay, and then, make sure Kyle Busch never does something like that ever again. Truly traumatic moment, but I mean, it was really, really something crazy. And you think about that again, under caution after some hard racing, and he's just right on the bumper of Hornaday's truck, spins him, washes him up the track, washes him down the track, ruins his championship hopes. Major implications, major moment. Now looking at this one, NASCAR has the opportunity, how they've learned over these past few years. You have to act. You have to make a move. And we mentioned it before off air when Anthony brought up the Kenseth and Logano Martinsville scenario in, I believe that was 2015, where Matt Kenseth just completely headhunted Joey. He was driving around a wrecked car looking for Logano, and ultimately was a recipient of a 3-race suspension, I believe. So there's a lot of things in play now that NASCAR, I like their approach. They kind of have a wait and see with it. We have to see the severity of the instance. We have to see, the perspectives of each driver, the conditions in which the accident or the intent of the wreck has happened. All of those things have to come into play. I like that they took their approach to kind of assess it and not have like one, because I don't think you can have like one kind of blanket rule to institute over something like this, because there's so many different scenarios. I mean, if you make a rule saying that you can't make contact with another vehicle under caution, well, what happens when you guys go down pit road under caution and you happen to bump into a car? They may not call anything, but the team that just received damage is going to be in NASCAR's ear complaining about that. So I like the approach they had. Going to the Sauter Hill accident itself, after seeing it, the damage that was caused to Austin, I guess start all of it, to have Austin retaliate. As soon as Austin hit where he hit him, it took the air right off the rear of those trucks, and that thing just went right around. Johnny's had a hot past, to say it lightly. He's had multiple run-ins with several drivers in the truck series. I can remember, I think he had a feud with Gragson. I don't know if it was last year or the year before, but that was more of name calling, hard racing. So he's had some kind of a checkered past with his run-ins and stuff like that. But on the other side, or at least for me, you gotta love that intensity, though. You never want to see anybody drive under caution to hurt somebody. That's completely out of line, especially the location that he did with the intent and how Anthony broke that down. NASCAR had to make that move. I don't think there was really any chance that NASCAR wasn't going to throw the book at him in some sense. But again, as race fans, as Rick alluded to before, this is very much that grassroots Saturday night or Friday night lights type scenario. How could you not be excited? I mean, we're pretty much adding topics to a show that we thought was just going to be about Darrell Waltrip. Now we're talking about the Truck Series on a NASCAR Cup off week. It's pretty awesome there. Want to give credit where credit's due, though. I'm not sure we'll really spend so much time on it. I see Sauter's truck right down there. Anthony's pulling up. But I have to say, we mentioned it really briefly. The Truck Series, if NASCAR institutes these schedule changes and we do have a more short track, more grassroots vibe to it, if they go that route, I think that'll be a home run. And I got to say, my hat's off, even though I'm not wearing a hat. But my hat is off to the Xfinity Series. I've been watching every Xfinity race this year, not really following a true driver like I followed Byron and Chase Elliott coming up the last few years. This is one hell of an exciting series in the Xfinity Series. I love watching those races. They've put on a hell of a show. If you're not watching the Xfinity Series or you're not watching the trucks after this weekend in Iowa, you got to tune in. Rick, I'm going to give it to you. I want to hear how you break down this accident while we're looking at it right here.
Well, it's interesting. I as you guys know, I'm kind of an old school guy. I don't, as I said earlier, believe in using a 3,000-pound machine as a weapon. I think when you start to target a driver's door that way, it is a very dangerous safety issue. I do think that when caution comes out, and you two guys race, as we've said before, my son races. When you're under caution, you are not as attentive as you are when you're operating under green. You are a bit more relaxed. You are likely getting some instructions from the crew chief, from the spotter, but it doesn't have the intensity when you are running under green. I think it's a little bit dangerous. And I think, Anthony, you were the one who pointed this out. Many drivers have admitted that under caution, they take a little bit of a break. They kind of loosen the belts a little bit. It's a little bit of a moment for that driver to catch his breath before they get that one to go. They pull the belts tight. They go racing again. I'm not a big advocate of that kind of retaliation. I don't have a problem with in a subsequent race week that you go looking for the guy and kind of ruin his day, so to speak. But purposely driving into somebody's driver's side door, I'm not a big advocate of that at all. What I am an advocate of, though, is the whole boys have at it theory. I really wish what happened is Johnny Sauter got out of his truck, went looking for Austin Hill back in the garage area, and handled it like men. That's exactly what used to happen years ago. It is what happens at your local track on a Friday night. I don't have a problem with that sort of incident, and I think NASCAR has shown actually over the past several months they're willing to let the fisticuffs go as long as it is not carried to an extreme. And I think, I would prefer to see that than what we saw Johnny Sauter actually do. That's my take on it. As I said, I'm kind of an old school guy when it comes to go back in the garage, hash it out, fight it out, do whatever you got to do, and then move on. But I think NASCAR's response was measured. I think the one race suspension is a reasonable penalty. I was reading something earlier this evening. It seems like Sauter is going to enjoy his week off because he's going to go short track racing somewhere. So, and I think all will be well next week. People will always be on edge looking for the two of them. They'll race their race. If they encounter each other, they'll handle it appropriately. And I don't think Johnny Sauter will cross a line like this again. Not like this.
No, I think this was like the message that he needed to cool down, because I was showing that replay of the incident at Texas, and over the radio you could hear Johnny say after the incident at Iowa, NASCAR, that's the second time he's wrecked us in 2 weeks, so I'm not taking it anymore. If you look at what happened at Texas, it's typical Texas racing with the new repave. Johnny Sauter's too wide with him on the high side. You could see that Austin loses it a little bit, whether or not he got some air sucked off of him or he had a loose conditioned race car. But he gets loose and he walks up the track, and unfortunately he does tap him. The important thing to look at in that incident and it's something that I've seen, and you guys have seen in go-kart racing, and I've seen in other forms of racing as well. You have to kind of look at the sign of respect that Austin gave Johnny at Texas. Normally, if you know it was somewhat intentional, Austin had all the room in the world to dive underneath and accelerate past to try to keep position, because Johnny was the one wrecking. He wasn't the one keeping his place in line. Austin you could almost argue that Austin lets off the gas and purposely stays behind Johnny after that incident, almost as a show of, hey, that was my bad. I'm not going to complete this pass on you. So I think that's something else to look at, where I don't think the Texas incident was or accident was purposeful at all on Austin's part, the way that Johnny made it seem in post-race interviews. This was kind of just a frustrated driver letting his emotions overflow, and we see the result of what happened.
We shall see over the coming weeks. It's always exciting. And Peter, you couldn't have been more spot on there. Renewed energy in these lower level series is a good thing for this sport.
Yeah.
The complaint has always been Monster Energy Cup, Monster Energy Cup, Monster Energy Cup. And, you tended to see Xfinity and the truck series kind of treated as, necessary stepchildren. And now you're starting to see a real focus on those two series. And I'll tell you what, the average fan that is not watching a truck series race or an Xfinity race is really missing out on something great. So kudos to those two series for giving us, as the drivers always say, putting on a good show. Next up is Sonoma, and we're going to talk Monster Energy Cup Series racing at Sonoma. It is NASCAR's first road course race of the year, and there's always a lot of exciting racing at Sonoma. Really quickly, who do we see as emerging as a guy who will win out in wine country in California?
I'll go out on a limb and just go Chase. He's been pretty strong at road courses ever since last year. Just before the Sonoma race weekend, he went to Spring Mountain at the Ron Fellows Corvette Driving School and did some pretty intensive studying with Alex Bowman and Jimmy and William Byron. And ever since that, it looks like his road course racing has just taken off. He obviously won at Watkins Glen last year. He was in, I think he had a top 10 or a top 5 finish at Sonoma. This is also a racetrack that's now a great equalizer. There's not one race car driver on the track that has raced the carousel. So there's no advantage to knowing the track surface there. Everybody's going to be on a learning curve. I think you're going to see Chase get really, really strong. If they're running the 750 package, it's going to be a really good race. I'm not sure which engine package they're running. I think it'll be a really good race. You're going to see a lot of dust flying, particles, tires flying everywhere. My pick is going to be Chase, just because of the strength that he's shown at road courses. He was even strong at the Roval. So I look forward to seeing how Chase does.
Peter, what do you think?
Ooh, I mean, I got to say great minds think alike, because that's where I was going with that one. So I'm hoping I don't take Rick's pick now. So I'm gonna go with a guy that's been pretty solid there, but I want to stay away from the clear-cut favorites. I don't want to pick Harvick, Truex, or Kyle Busch for this one. I like Clint Bowyer at this track. I'm hoping I didn't take it now. I saw the head nod there. But one guy that I'm thinking as well, just to kind of go away from Clint for a quick second, has been Kyle Larson. He's qualified really, really well at Sonoma, but he hasn't been able to string those races together. And I'm thinking about the carousel, and as I've been learning about it and reading about it and trying to remember way back when I remember Jeff dominated on that circuit, it's gonna be an aggressive addition to the track, and I feel like that favors the old school. And Kyle Larson's that old school type racer. He's not afraid to mix it up. He's going to take chances. He's gutsy. Stenhouse is like that too, but I don't think Stenhouse has that road racer in him. I don't think he's really kind of shown that speed or consistency ever. So I don't think I would pick him here, but I'm going to go with either Clint or Larson. Clint's just been solid at Sonoma. And, I go back to 2 years ago when he was driving that Lightning McQueen paint scheme, and that thing was beaten all to heck. And he almost brought that thing home in victory lane if it wasn't for, some late race charging from Kevin Harvick. You clear as day saw Clint Boyer as one of the clear cut favorites there. Truex has been a great road course racer, as is Harv. I expect both of those guys to be in the mix, but I think the 14 car is going to have something to say at Sonoma for sure.
Well, I'll tell you what. I am going to, since you didn't take him, I am going to take the guy that's from Bakersfield, California, and I think it's going to be Kevin Harvick. I think this is the week he breaks out. I think that in sports in general, there's always that moment where you can't really point to technical expertise, you can't really point to momentum, you can't point to anything that is a traditional sports reason for why you think somebody's going to win. This is one of those occasions. He's pretty close to home. He's a pretty good road course racer. And I just think this is his breakout week. I do see it being a race that will be similar to the one we saw a few years ago. I think it was in his last year, it might have been, when Tony Stewart actually won there. And it came down. Ben's pointing something out to me about as long as it's not the 18.
Fair enough.
Or 19.
I just think what ends up happening is we're going to have a race that's very competitive, and it is going to go right down to the wire. I think you have potential here that when they come around that last turn and they start heading up that hill toward the checkered, you could have 2 or 3 guys in contention right there.
And that carousel is a perfect dumping point.
Yeah.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is.
That was going to be what I was going to pose to you guys. I was going to say now that the laps will be longer, there's a little bit more real estate to play with here. Last year with the stage racing at Sonoma, it was pretty tame. They ran it like an endurance kind of sports car race where people split it at different points. Really not worrying about the stage points. You had half the field thinking, okay, I can bank those points, and half the field really trying to go for the W. But one thing I'm really interested in is this going to be, as Rick just said, is this going to be an intense one? So I think if it is, I think it's just going to reaffirm the argument that, like everybody says, we want more short tracks, but also want more road courses too. The road courses have been phenomenal races the last few years. I can't remember a snoozer in recent memory, but I always think back to, was it Keselowski versus Kyle Busch and Marcus Ambrose at Watkins Glen. Even Watkins Glen last year was awesome. Sonoma's been always great. And the Roval, I mean, the Roval was wild, just to kind of put it at what it was. But this also brings up an interesting point for next time too. I'm going to jot this down once I end off. But stage racing at the road courses. Again, this is something that's come into question with NASCAR and with the fan base. Is that something that should exist there, or does it change the dynamic of the race too much? So that's going to be one thing I'm going to be interested to look for. But I am all for the intensity. I want to see a drag race to the finish. I want to see people a little upset, but I don't want to see anybody get driven into the door.
No, I agree. I think what you're going to see is an exciting race on Sunday. I always like going to Sonoma, just like I always like going to the Glen. I think it gives the sport a little bit of that change up and a challenge to the drivers. What I find interesting, and I don't think I'm thinking of this incorrectly. Over the past several years, the mainstream drivers in Cup Series have become far more proficient at road course racing, and you see fewer and fewer and fewer ringers being brought in for the road course racing, which I actually like. I like the fact that a driver who is accustomed to turn left, turn left, turn left, turn left, up the bank, down the bank, find the right groove, find the right place to be on the track, now is challenged with truly developing their driving expertise to include very elaborate, technically difficult tracks. I just love that. I think it's great that we've seen guys like Boyer and Truex and Harvick emerge as very proficient road course racers. I think it brings a whole new dynamic to the Cup Series, and for one, I'm really happy to see it.
I want to just to kind of jump on there too. I absolutely agree. I think less ringers is definitely a better thing. I think them adding the Roval to the playoffs too is so pivotal, because these two races, even though they're just two races, they are a part of your season. To be a true champion, you have to show prowess on everything that we race on. So to see that these guys have taken the incentive and the initiative to develop and hone their craft, like Anthony alluded to before, the Hendrick Motorsports team going to sports car practices and learning how to race. You see a lot of drivers racing in the K&N West Series race this weekend, as practice, and they'll get into other cars, for added, for some added lap time. It's so critical. So I'm always looking forward to the road courses, and I love the added intensity, and I love how the drivers really take care and interest in them, because I think it's part of our future for sure. There's two tracks I've always loved, and I can't wait. This is one I had circled for a while.
Well, what I'm hearing is the perfect segue into our last topic. I hear our newest member of the NASCAR world and our newest member of Chase Elliott Nation crying a bit in the background, and I have to tell you, there's a little bit of sadness that goes with our last topic for the evening, and that's as we say goodbye to old DW. And yep, Anthony Anastasia's got it right. There's a little bit of sadness associated with this Sunday's race being the last time on the Fox network that we're going to hear those three magical words that I know a lot of people don't like it. It's grown weary and tired to some. But it will be the last time we hear boogity, boogity, boogity at the beginning of a race. I did want to ask you guys what your thoughts were and are about Darrell Waltrip, the driver, the broadcaster, and the man. And, I've read a lot and I've seen a lot of commentary about DW, some of it not incredibly flattering, some of it early on in this year, articles that were written by people who really I think personally, kind of forced the issue of his retirement. And yet, his contributions to this sport overall really can't be truly measured. You guys are far too young to remember him as a driver. I will tell you, he was a massively talented driver, and he was really, to NASCAR, and I know you two guys are from the Metro New York area, and Peter, if I remember correctly, you are a New York Jets fan.
Yes.
Okay. Well, again, probably too young to totally remember him, but Darrell Waltrip to NASCAR when he was a driver, was what Joe Namath was to the New York Jets. He had that swagger, and he didn't get the nickname Jaws for nothing. He had that swagger about him that was not at all betrayed by his talent. He, more often than not, made good on what he said. And his contributions on the track, if they weren't enough, his contributions off the track, I don't know how much you know about him, he and his wife personally, but two very religious people. They've done an awful lot of charitable work. And then his contributions to the NASCAR world through broadcasting. And you have to remember, and it's easy for newer fans to either forget this or maybe not even aware of it. DW's first broadcast was at once one of the happiest days of his life and yet one of the saddest. His first broadcast was the Daytona 500 in 2001 when we lost Dale Earnhardt. If you've never seen it, folks that are watching us tonight, if you've never seen the on-air broadcast booth video of Darrell Waltrip during that last lap of the 2001 Daytona 500, go watch it. And bring a box of tissues, because his emotion for his brother winning the race, and then almost immediately his eyes turning toward turn 4 at Daytona and just saying, I hope Dale's okay. If that doesn't get to you, you don't even have to be a NASCAR fan. If that doesn't get to you, nothing will. He's been, for me, the kind of guy that came along in the broadcast booth. And again, I know he has his detractors. He came along at the right moment in time. He was the right guy at the right moment to grow the sports viewing audience with his very down-home, easy to understand, youthful exuberance despite his age. And I, for one, am really going to miss him. Peter, what do you think as we say goodbye to DW?
Yeah, I'm with you there. I'm really gonna miss DW. I mean, you talk about somebody who, is a surefire Hall of Famer, somebody that he's been in one of the previous classes. But honestly, when I think about Darrell Waltrip, Hall of Fame comes to mind. I mean, on and off the track, look at how much he's done to the sport. All of the generations of fans that he's created. He's been the voice to a lot of people. I remember, the later stages of his career when I was getting into the sport in the early 90s, where he was racing for his own team, and then he was moonlighting with a couple other cars. I remember, for some reason, a Kmart and a Route 66 car, I think towards the very, very end. And, he just always seemed like such a cool personality. He was funny. He had that Southern persona about him. And then as you start to study and learn about the history of the sport, you really get a good idea of who he was. And I think your comparison to Broadway Joe is so on point. Darrell walked the walk and he talked the talk. And he oftentimes talked first, but he was certainly one of those guys that could back it up. I mean, he drove for Junior Johnson, one of the premier teams back in the day. He was on one of the greatest teams, well-known teams, but he was hated because he was going head-to-head with Cale Yarborough and Richard Petty, and he was calling them out. And these were the darlings of our sport. You didn't even think twice to do that. And he was like, I'm going to make a name for myself. I can beat these guys, and that's how he did it. There's a lot of those things that describes Darrell in the early stages of his career that just kind of creates this awesome character. And then everything changes in an unlikely place, and he, as I'm sure probably thanked Rusty for it, but the All-Star race, when Rusty Wallace spins him, and all of a sudden he has that kind of WWE wrestling heel turn to face moment where all of a sudden he's now revered and loved by fans. And then you see the new Darrell that emerges where the fans are reveling behind him. And then that's the Darrell that retires and ultimately goes off into the booth and becomes this relatable guy who gives us NASCAR in a way that we can all understand and we can all relate to. And his first moment to give us NASCAR is one, as you said before, a gut-wrenching, heartwarming at the same time moment where how could you not fall in love with this sport? Even in the most tragic moment, you're seeing the most real people out there. They wear their heart on their sleeve. They give you everything, and they drive really cool race cars at the end of it.
And it's interesting you say that, Peter, because long before any of us heard the term reality TV, the 2001 Daytona 500 was about as real as it gets. And I remember back to that day, and I remember, and I've watched the video numerous times. Darrell Waltrip brought the emotion of the sport and the emotion of just how wonderful the sport can be, the excitement of watching his brother win the Daytona 500, the single most important race that NASCAR has, and yet also brought the emotion of, and at that moment, nobody really knew what had happened to Dale Sr. or just how bad it really was. Just that sort of hiccup you get in the center of your chest when you're like, oh my God, all of the happy emotions I have are now just gone away because of the concern for a friend. A lot's been said about how DW has worn out his welcome. And I, for one, don't agree with that. I think there's a place for him. Now, it's obviously not going to be at Fox unless Fox has a sudden, epiphany and decides that there's a place for DW. And I think that place, and we've talked about this a bit before, is in their post-race coverage. I think he's, and I'm going to say something that I don't want to be disrespectful to the up-and-coming broadcasters, and there's a whole bunch of good ones, starting with Jeff Gordon. But I think DW brings an old-school, down-home look to racing that there is a danger we could lose touch with it. Dale Jr. has brought that instantly to NBC's coverage. And I know that in Chase Elliott Nation, we have a lot of our dear friends and fellow members of NASCAR Nation that live south of the Mason-Dixon line. They don't sound like you and me, Peter, or like Anthony. They sound a little bit different. But you know what? This was their sport before it was ours. And I fear that when you start to just dispatch people like DW, we've talked about this early on in a prior broadcast, you run the risk of losing touch with who you were. And I fear that this is a move that was probably necessary for Fox to do, but they might be missing an opportunity here to keep him on board in some sort of post-race capacity, particularly when the coverage is on FS1, so that we don't lose touch with the history of NASCAR. And I was reading something earlier today, and I think the article was actually spot on. I think you need, as Tim McGraw would say, that Southern voice in the broadcast. I'm sorry, I feel that way. I think that's part of our history. It's part of who we are. The broadcasters, and I think this is going to be unfortunate. I didn't realize this until earlier this afternoon. And I don't know if you knew this, Mike Joy is 70 years old as well. So one by one, we're losing the voices of our sport And I know it's inevitable that it's going to happen, but I really do think that these people should be allowed to go out on their terms, and I think we should find ways to keep them involved and engaged because they do have a story to tell. I think in many cases, some of the newer broadcasters are, and again, I want to say this respectfully, are talking over the heads of the casual fan. DW brought that again, down home flavor to it, where, oh, yeah, I can understand that. You didn't really have to know a whole lot about the nuts and bolts of a vehicle to understand what DW is telling you. Peter, what are your thoughts on that sort of thing? Do we need that Southern voice in the sport to have the continuity with our history?
I feel like we do. Going back to when I got into the sport, trying to remember the broadcast as much as I remember the epic moments from the early 90s as a little guy trying to get into this thing. Benny Parsons stuck out to me more so than Bob Jenkins or any of the other announcers that I heard. I always go back to BP, and I try to do this without starting to tear a little bit. But BP was the voice of NASCAR for me. Being somebody who, when I got a chance to go to the South as a little kid, it was most likely to go to Florida, maybe go to Disney World, maybe see my grandparents. So really didn't get that NASCAR kind of deep Southern vibe at all. So hearing that made me really feel like I was getting that culture. It was getting to understand the history of the sport. And as somebody who teaches social studies that just has an avid love about American history and world civ, learning about the history of the sport that I love so much was always so much fun. And who better to tell it than the pioneers that paved it, from the place where it started, from the red dirt and the clay and all of that in between. So I loved BP, and then when Darrell came in, I felt like it was a continuation. It was almost like it picked up right where it left off. He made it fun. I promised myself before I got on today, I would I definitely bring up Disney Cars, because Darrell did something in Disney Cars that I think was just phenomenal. And I have several examples, but I'll try to save some just for sake of time. He became Darrell Car Trip. He became a car version of himself in the booth, saying the same boogity, 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 relating the Disney movie to what he does on Sundays. And I remember just talking to friends that weren't into NASCAR, and then now talking to students that weren't into NASCAR. And they would be like, oh, I checked out NASCAR, and they really say boogity, 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 just like in Cars. And I go, well, it's actually the same guy. And I go, that is the coolest thing. That is that's part of NASCAR. I didn't know that. And I don't want to lose that part of NASCAR. That being said, we've had several conversations before, as we've all alluded to. His time and place in the booth, it's probably a pretty much at this point. This was the timing for this change to come or to happen. Maybe it came a little bit too premature, as you alluded to before. But honestly, it's going to be different without him. There's been talks about Jeff being biased towards Hendrick Motorsports. There's been talks and hatred towards Darrell being biased towards Toyota and Kyle Busch. But you know what? At the end of the day, he still gave us this down-to-earth feel that you've been talking about. And I think that if Fox is going to try to salvage that with Darrell's absence, there's a couple of things that they can do. First and foremost, they can double down, and I think they should, on Larry McReynolds. Larry McReynolds has a great way of relating the car to the general the general audience, where he makes it much more accessible for someone who knows nothing about cars to get into NASCAR. My fiance, who's become a great fan in the sport, she calls him Micka Macca. She loves Larry Mack. When he comes on the screen and he starts explaining the car, she's understanding it, and she gets into her favorite driver, Bowman, and is like, well, Micka Macca said that you got to, you got to make this adjustment if you're going to make that car faster. So she's not calling the shots, and it makes it fun. And that's relatable. I don't think, as much as I'm rocking my favorite Gordon t-shirt today, as much as I love Jeff, I don't think Jeff is relatable like that. I think Jeff is star power. I think when they say, well, like, tune into the Fox booth because we have Jeff Gordon, it's a big deal. He's not that relatable, though. So I hope they double down with him. I know, as you said before, they have an all-star lineup of a lot of immensely talented individuals that work well within Fox. So if they do continue a three-person booth in Darrell's absence, I'm sure they'll pick the right man or woman to do it. It'll be interesting to see what they do going forward. But my other thing I heard today on my way home from school was really interesting. I never really get the chance. I got out of school early. Today was our last day. I got to listen to Chocolate Myers, and he brought up the same topic. And he said this was his life, and his wife told him, "This is going to kill you. Now that you're done, you're done. You're not working the pits anymore. There's nothing that you really like looking forward to." And he had a conversation with Richard Childress, and Richard Childress said this was right about the time they were starting their museum. And Richard Childress said, "Why don't you come down and help me out at the museum?" And that's what's kept him involved and around the sport and kind of transitioned to. I hope there's something that Darrell can transition to, because he's such a gem and pioneer of this sport. He knows so much of the history, and he has a great way of relating that to people. I hope there's something that can kind of be spun, or maybe even the Hall of Fame can have like a Legends Hour or something, where on certain days there's like a Q&A session or something, and he gets to walk around the hall and interact with fans, because I've met him once in person at Darlington. He is such an approachable guy. Will spend the time with you, and he feeds off that energy. If you really care about the sport, he's going to give you everything that he's got up front. So he's going to be truly missed on my end. I hope that they can kind of keep, and I know the Fox will do right by him to remember his legacy, but I hope that they can keep somebody that can capture the same energy that DW brings.
Anthony, thoughts on DW? We've talked earlier about the culture, the fact that he represents not only old school racing, but he represents really, and I say this with all the reverence in the world, that our friends and neighbors south of the Mason-Dixon line, who don't talk like you and me, who have that delightful accent in their voice, this was their sport before it was ours. And I will tell you, I'm going to miss that down home flavor that DW brought to the broadcast. What say you about that?
I agree with that. He's one of the last of the good old boys. You do have not characters, but you do have people on that are still part of NASCAR media, notably Mike Joy, Larry Mack, that have been around for, it seems like, forever, either behind a TV camera or on top of a pit box. But he's one of the last drivers, or one of the last people in media that's a driver that brought that flavor of the good old boys owning NASCAR and in the heyday, and bringing that piece of history. Because we kind of lack Larry McReynolds in the booth. He's not as big of a part of the broadcast. He was another one of those ones, like Peter said, that could just make that car so relatable to the regular everyday person. Same thing with Mike Joy. Jeff Gordon is that star power now for Fox. One of the interesting things I was thinking about when you guys were talking about where you can see Darrell moving on to, I don't think he's done yet either. But one really interesting thing, I think, would be Motor Racing Outreach, the NASCAR Christian organization that they have. He's given the opening prayer at races before. He's been very vocal, especially in his retirement speech that he gave at Bristol. The announcement that Christianity and Jesus and God are a huge part of his life, and that they always will be. He has a lot to be thankful for. So I think that's something we could see him getting involved in a little bit more. I don't think he's just going to go off into the sunset. I think he's got a lot left to give. I'm sure, and I really do hope that he has plans for the future involving the sport of NASCAR. It's just such a big part of his life, and you could see in that speech that he was giving at Bristol that he was done, but you could see in his eyes that he really wasn't. It was just he was moving on to a new chapter, and I think that next chapter still has motorsports involved. As far as what he's contributed, I never really followed him as a driver when he was in the 17 car, when he was in that 66. He was kind of just one of those guys that raced against Earnhardt, raced against Jeff, and was not a track filler as we know them, but he was just one of those other race car drivers that had a chance to win every weekend. I first really kind of took notice to him when he filled in the one car for Dale Earnhardt. I thought that was pretty cool because I had known that they were rivals growing up or growing through their racing career, and to see him racing for Earnhardt was kind of like a giddy moment for me because it was just like Earnhardt now Earnhardt's the king. You're kind of admitting like, hey, Earnhardt has owned you for all these years. But to me, his biggest impact and legacy will always be in the Fox Sports booth. And again, like Peter alluded to, Darrell Cartrip. Like you can't get a better character in a Cars movie that is exactly who he is in real life, and that's Darrell Cartrip. He didn't have to act. He's a guy who just brought his personality to the movie, and just made that connection. But behind the booth, he brought the knowledge, he brought the history, he brought the attitude and the swagger that he had growing up through the sport as Jaws. That's what he was known for. He was known for talking, and he never had a dull moment on camera. We always talk about how maybe towards the last 2 or 3 seasons, he's kind of faded out as far as being that important figure in the booth. But I think that's just an element of how long he's been in the booth and away from driving. He's lost touch with the machines that they're racing today, which is why I think people like Jeff Gordon and Dale Jr. are very relevant in the booth. They're not that far removed from the sport. They know how these cars have raced. They've seen all the changes that the cars have gone through, so they know how the cars are reacting. Look, Darrell Waltrip is a piece of NASCAR history. I believe he's in the NASCAR Hall of Fame as a driver. I don't see why you wouldn't add him into the NASCAR Hall of Fame in some kind of media capacity as well as a broadcaster, or give him I think it's the Jim France Award they give at the Hall of Fame inductions, is like one of the ceremonial awards that they give for media members. I can't see Darrell being done. It's gonna stink not hearing boogity 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 at the beginning part of the season anymore. That was like one of the coolest feelings for the Daytona 500. That's how you knew NASCAR season had started. The boogity 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 for the Daytona 500. It's going to be interesting to see who they replace, or if they even replace them at all. Maybe they just go with a 2-man team for a season and see how that works out. Unless there's a surprise retirement announcement, my money to replace him would probably be Jamie Mack.
You know, you piqued my curiosity, and I know that we're running a little bit short on time, and I do want to get to just 2 quick other topics before we do our hot lap section. I'm going to give you a comparison, and you guys are a little bit young to remember this, but I know you're both, in addition to being huge NASCAR fans, you're both big baseball fans. DW to me is for NASCAR what Phil Rizzuto was to Yankees baseball. Couldn't really relate to today's players. Had a great ball playing career. Kind of became everybody's favorite old uncle. Had a lot of cliche sayings. Sometimes they got tired and old, but he was just simply lovable. And that's how I'm going to remember DW in the NASCAR booth, as someone who, you know, you could always rely on him to bring things to a level that we could all understand. And I'll tell you what, he's the kind of guy that you'd like to be sitting across from at the Thanksgiving table, because you could just have a conversation with him all afternoon long. 2 real quick topics before we get to hot laps. All right, hot lap. Roger Penske being awarded the Medal of Freedom. What a wonderful honor for Roger, and what a wonderful honor for the sport and for motorsports in general. It's a story that broke earlier this week. It is something that is somewhat rare, and it recognizes the best of American society. Any thoughts on that, Peter? You had raised the issue with me earlier, and I think it's a great opportunity to say congratulations to the captain for just all of his contributions to America and a well-deserved honor.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely, and congrats to Roger Penske for receiving such an honor. One of the biggest things I can think of now is to all of us, and we've spoken about this in the past. Roger's an icon. He's somebody who's really defined American motorsports for decades, and will continue to do so for generations going forward. But now I feel like becoming a recipient of this award and being acknowledged in American history, I feel like he's on the same level as much as we mentioned, the automotive pioneers now. He's done so much for the auto industry outside of just motorsports where, as a teacher, we mentioned Henry Ford. We briefly mentioned Durant and Louis Chevrolet with General Motors being formed in our curriculum, but Henry Ford, the assembly line, credit where credit is due. True pioneer in its own right. Roger Penske has now achieved that status. Okay, he's not a groundbreaking innovator in terms of creating an assembly line, but for what he's done for the city of Detroit, for what he's done for motorsports, for what he's done for the auto industry, and he almost bailed out an entire corporation before the government got involved. He has done so much to the American auto industry and the country. That he deserves his place in history, and I am so proud to be a fan of Penske, Team Penske Racing, and to see him receive this honor is an awesome thing.
Anthony, thoughts on the captain receiving one of our nation's highest honors?
Completely deserving. We saw Roger speak at the NASCAR Hall of Fame induction ceremony this past year. And even just as a person who is accepting an honor such as being inducted into the Hall of Fame, he took command of the room when he spoke. Everybody was quiet. You could see everybody was listening, and you understand why people respect this man so much. There's a reason they call him the captain. He's the leader of every room he walks into, and every room that he speaks to gives him the fullest of attention, because this is a man who's been around the sport for years, been around businesses for years. Even as we drove up to Penske Racing, unfortunately they weren't open, but you just had this feeling of this is a building where business happens and winning is the ultimate and only goal. Going through Hendrick, it's like a college campus. There's multiple buildings. You have this feeling of success there. But when you drove up to Penske's building, it's just this feeling of this is where history in racing has been made. And this is where there's no other option but win. There's no other. Just looking at the building itself, you get that feeling. And from what we've heard, Roger will stay in the office for hours on end at the end to make sure that everything is to what he likes. And I think we spoke about this in last week or the week before. To hear that he's getting this achievement award is very encouraging. It's deserving for him, but it's also very encouraging to get this sport into the spotlight. Look, Donald Trump is our president. He has been on the face of NASCAR vehicles in the last few years as part of his election campaign, and has obviously welcomed Joey Logano into the White House as every president has, but he made it a little bit more important of an event, it seems. And for him to be giving somebody like Roger Penske, I don't think if you have anybody else in the office that can be considered a recent candidate or a future candidate, I don't think Roger Penske gets the award. I think it's somebody like Donald Trump who understands what it takes to run a business, how it is to be successful in business, the sacrifices that are needed. And he's also somebody who can recognize somebody like Roger Penske who may not have the same business goals as him or the same ideals as him, but he knows a person who has earned, in every sense of the word, a lifetime of achievement in his own right. And for Roger Penske to be getting this honor is completely at 100% deserving. The man has put his blood, sweat, and tears into his business and motorsports for decades.
Our other last formal topic is, and I can remember back in in years gone by on NASCAR race day, you would always have someone who, when they were asked about who they picked for a certain race, there was always somebody, inevitably, and it was usually John Roberts, who would say, "Stick with the Biff." Well, I'll tell you, quite an accomplishment. And I always thought, there's drivers that, as they kind of lose their seats, there's drivers that you think to yourself, yeah, we're really never going to see them again. I never really felt that way about Greg Biffle. I always felt there was going to be a place and a time for him to reemerge. Very quickly, guys, thoughts on Greg Biffle and just where he is now and whether we're going to see him, reemerge as a Truck Series driver.
I mean, you talk about drama in the Truck Series again, and you just rewind another week, and here we are. Greg Biffle coming out of retirement, winning Texas in a Kyle Busch Motorsports truck was truly a remarkable story. You piqued my interest when you said that you never thought that he was really fully gone. I think that's interesting because I feel like he just faded. I really, really believe we'd never see him again.
Well, Peter, not to interrupt you, the reason I think he faded very quickly is because of the sudden, and it was very sudden, downturn of Roush Racing. Before Fenway got themselves involved, we started seeing one by one these guys leaving. We saw, Matt leaving and Carl leaving, and so I think there was a series of events that sort of hastened his departure from the sport.
Yeah.
And do I think he is a top 5 driver in the series? No, I never thought that. But he was a consistent top 15 driver week after week after week. And I never really thought he was retired for good.
Yeah, you get the same feeling with his career that you do kind of with Jamie McMurray's career. Although I do think the Biff had more victories. He was always there. He was never always a contender, but he was always there. Biffle did have a really good, I think, 2008 or 2009 season where he banged out, I think, 5 or 6 wins. But I had the same sentiment as you, Rick. He kind of shot himself in the foot. I think Roush gave him the option where he said, look, I'll take you on for another year, if I'm not mistaken. But it sounded like he wanted to go to a winning ride. And I think in the year that he retired and the offseason that existed, there just really kind of either wasn't a quality ride out there, or all the people looking for seats out there were looking specifically for younger drivers that they could develop. So it was just a really bad timing for Biffle. And I had the same sentiment. I didn't think he was going to go away. He said he started talking immediately how he wasn't done with motorsports. He wasn't done with NASCAR. He was going to try to make a comeback. And it was the same feeling kind of with Matt Kenseth when he was getting pushed out of the 20 car for Eric Jones. You had the feeling he wasn't done. You didn't know how he was going to make it back. But you saw that he came back in the 6 car last year as almost like a development driver for the program, not as a development driver for himself. I don't think Biffle's done. It sounds like he wants to run more races. It sounds like there's serious talks for a few more races in that 51 car. The one downside, I guess, to Biffle winning in the 51 car is you got much more heat on Gilliland and Burton now to put together a winning package. You got to remember, before he gets in the car the truck this weekend, he hasn't been in a truck since I think 2002 or 2003. And he hasn't been in a race car since 2015. And he only tested for about 15 to 20 minutes 4 months ago. Then he jumps in, starts top 10. I believe he had a top 10 starting. And he goes on to win the race in the 51 car. And like Kyle Busch said in a tweet, I think a week or two before, if you can't get it done in KBM equipment, you don't deserve to be here. So I think the heat is definitely cranked up on those 2 drivers now.
Yeah, it's up to 11 for those guys, and my hat's off to Harrison Burton and Christopher Bell for their Xfinity program, because Bell ends up winning the race at Iowa, but Harrison Burton had a solid run for Joe Gibbs Racing, so that's got to give him a confidence booster. it gets back in the trucks, and hopefully he can turn the ship around and make it work out for him. As far as Biffle goes, he was on the short list. He tried to call up Thorsport, trying to get in Sauter's ride this week. Unfortunately, he can't register again for that triple truck challenge to win some extra money. But you know, it'd be wild. It would be one heck of a constellation if they can guarantee him a seat for Eldora. That would be pretty cool.
That would be really cool. I could see him being in the 51 car for that. Just put more irons in the fire for that race. I don't think he's done in NASCAR, but I can see him being completely complacent, running a part-time truck series schedule that's not stress-free. It allows him to run his dirt and quads out east or no out west in the desert. And look, the Biff even said, I think in a tweet at the beginning of the season, I think he was sitting outside of his house. He had his like Maybach and a quad in the driveway, and he's like, "Don't worry, I'm not stressing about not driving right now." Like, he's pretty complacent with where he is. He said it in the pre-race interview. He's complacent. He just has a love for racing.
You know what that brings up, and I know I don't want to get too carried away with this comment, and I don't want to take away from your final thoughts on it, but Anthony brings up a good point, and something we've talked about again in the past. Now there are many NASCAR conversations. Having him back is good for the Truck Series. The Truck Series used to be that real true bridge where when you were done with your Cup career, you went down to the trucks and you spent some time there. It was a lesser schedule. It was a good opportunity to get people to go to the grassroots tracks to see the stars and to get to see some hard racing. And what better measure of the new upcoming talent than veterans that have kind of paved the way and defined our sport for decades than to mix and race against them. So that was one thing. It was really cool to see Biffle there. I wish there was a lot more veterans. I'm glad a lot of them went to the booth, but I would have loved to have seen them race the shorter Truck Series schedule. That would have been so cool. And as a Jeff Gordon fan, I would have thought that would have been really cool.
Well, we have time to do one more hot lap. You guys know the drill. 30 seconds. I'm going to give you a topic. This is going to be a little bit of an easy one, I think. 30 seconds only. And here is your topic. What is the single, just one thing, single thing you will miss the most about Darrell Waltrip? Peter, you're up.
Single thing? I mean, the easy way to do this would be like, I'm gonna miss the Boogity. I'm gonna miss the Boogity so much, but I feel like that's too easy of an answer. I'm gonna miss Darrell car trip. That's where I'm gonna go with it. I brought in the Cars reference. I'm going out with the Cars reference. If they make a Cars 4, he needs to be in it. That's what I'm gonna go with.
Anthony, 30 seconds. What are you gonna miss the most about DW?
I was gonna go with the Boogity, but if you look at it, you just gotta the personality that he brought to the booth every week. I don't think he's done probably with the Cars movies. I think if they do make a Cars 4, I think he definitely makes a comeback to that. But you're gonna miss the personality and the connection to that grassroots 70s and 80s racing knowledge and stories that he would bring in the booth.
Okay, my final word, real quickly. It's clearly Boogity, and I'll tell you why. My wife enjoyed racing, watching her son race, but she didn't really become a person who would watch a NASCAR race until she heard those 3 words. She thought it was just the neatest thing. So we put a cap on DW's broadcast career for now. We talked about a lot tonight. An ambitious show. Peter, good to have you back with us with the school year being over. Anthony, you look like someone who is actually getting some level of sleep with a brand new Chase Elliott fan in the household.
Trying my best.
And so we head off to wine country in Sonoma, and we will catch up with everyone after we go racing in that beautiful, beautiful section of California. I'm looking up at the spotter stand. Anthony, real quickly before I take our direction from the spotter, tell our audience how they can become more connected with 3 Wide.
Okay. Sam, as always, guys, if you come across the videos, you enjoy the content, hit the subscribe button, hit the bell notification. It gives you instant notifications when we post up new live events and when we start broadcasting our weekly broadcasts. Comments are always appreciated in the videos down below, topic suggestions, questions, even just advice that you may have for the channel and what type of direction you think you'd like to see us go in will be taken into consideration. But the most important thing is hit that subscribe button and hit that bell icon so you get your email and text notifications as to channel activity.
Peter, you need to get your rest. You had a very good and successful school year, and hopefully you'll have a wonderful summer. Obviously, we will be seeing a lot of each other over this summer. And Anthony, get rest when you can, my friend. It isn't easy. It's been 20 years for me, and I don't care to ever have to go through that sort of thing again. But anyway, you have a beautiful new NASCAR fan, a beautiful new daughter to go with your 3-year-old.
3.5, yeah, 3.
Beautiful 3-year-old daughter who is taking to the big sister thing beautifully and right away, and just a wonderful young family. Looking forward to seeing you folks in a few weeks, actually, at Pocono.
Yes.
Can't wait.
We're
So
going to definitely do some kind of live event that weekend with our phone.
we'll have to do that. We'll have
Yeah.
to try to do something for the fans.
Definitely.
Looking up at the spotter stand, he is giving us direction, and you have to remember that until the spotter tells you that you are clear, you are running
3 wide.
So for Anthony, for Peter, I'm Rick. Have a great week, everybody, and we will see you after Sonoma. Good night, everybody.